This adventure began with an accustomed cruise and concluded with an essay that Badge Admiral declared as one of the most gruesome in their careers. On May 15, 2015, 32-year-old Alice Monto and 35-year-old Mark Montero larboard their home in Phoenix, Arizona to Appointment Bryce Canyon Civic Park. The cruise was declared to booty about 8 hours on the highway, including several stops to refuel the car and grab candy at roadside cafes. However, the couple never fabricated it to their destination. Their aftermost recorded arresting was accustomed abreast a baby gas base forth the highway in the northeastern allotment of the state. A few hours later, both of their phones chock-full responding, and their abode were unknown. The car they were animate was anon appear stolen, and a 5-year chase yielded no results. Alice Montero was built in 1983 in Tucson, Arizona. She formed as a remote graphic designer, freelanced, and ran a baby online business, Affairs Souvenirs. Mark Montero was built in 1980 in Phoenix, formed in logistics, and was a long-haul barter driver. The brace had been affiliated for 3 years and generally Catholic calm throughout the western United States, visiting civic parks and attributes reserves. The cruise to Bryce Canyon had been planned ages in advance, and the Aubaird's catch in Pangitch, Utah was accepted 3 weeks before departure. They larboard in the morning with 2 suitcases, a camera, camping appliance for picnics, and a minimal accumulation of aliment and water. The aftermost accepted acquaintance with the couple was recorded at about 11:20 a.m. at a Chevron gas base abreast the town of Holos, Arizona. Surveillance cameras recorded their car, a gray 2009 Honda Accord at Pump Cardinal 3. Mark was bushing up the catch basin while Alice went into the Abundance to buy baptize and coffee. The footage shows them abiding to the car together, accepting into the front seats, and animate off adjoining U.S. Avenue 89. This was the aftermost accepted record of their whereabouts. Their corpuscle phones registered a arresting from a corpuscle belfry 25 kilometers arctic of the gas station, afterwards which both accessories went offline. Attempts to contact them throughout the day were unsuccessful. Still, their admired ones did not think much of it at first, bold that their ability be no corpuscle annual in the aerial area. The abutting day, May 16th, ancestors articulate the alarm. The brace did not admission at Bryce Canyon. They were not cat and mouse for them at the hotel, and they did not acknowledgement their phones. On the aforementioned day, an official missing persons abode was filed with the Phoenix Badge Department. The Utah police additionally abutting the chase, as it was affected that the dematerialization had occurred while traveling amid states. Descriptions and photos of Alice and Mark were beatific to all artery patrols, motel, and gas stations forth their presumed route. The car was listed as an accessible agency of bus line for the missing persons. Still 2 canicule later, the cache was afflicted to baseborne in the federal database as there were signs of an agitated disappearance. During the aboriginal canicule of the search, all known stops and exits from the artery were arrested and roadside parking lots, blow areas, and adjacent abounding areas were searched. No claimed belongings, signs of a struggle, or the car were found. Mobile Buzz abstracts did not acquiesce board to define the breadth at the time of the disappearance. The last arresting was too abrupt, and the coordinates were not accurate. Board acclaimed that the breadth where the arresting was absent had little cartage and basal infrastructure. The abutting boondocks was 30 kilometers abroad, and the gas station where they had larboard was the aftermost abode with cameras and staff. Drivers who had Catholic on that alley that day did not report annihilation apprehensive aback questioned, and no one saw a car larboard on the alley or signs of an accident. A week after the disappearance, the Federal Bureau of Assay abutting the case at the appeal of Bounded Badge, as the missing bodies could accept beyond accompaniment curve at the time of the abduction, which would accept fabricated the abomination of federal jurisdiction. A acting collective assignment force was formed consisting of FBI investigators, the Arizona Artery Patrol, and the Utah Police. Theories of carjacking, robbery, and kidnapping for bribe were explored. However, the closing seemed beneath likely as no aggressive letters or demands had been accustomed by the relatives. The couple's ancestors and a company abutting the search, distributing flyers and announcement on amusing media. Bounded annual stations aired a video from the gas station, which was the aftermost acceptance that Alice and Mark were animate and together. Despite an animated vice campaign, the case did not move advanced in the afterward months. As the weeks passed, the chase was scaled aback and the capital action remained with the assay team, which periodically checked anonymous letters and advice from accidental witnesses, but none of them were confirmed. By the end of 2015, official search efforts had been suspended. The car had not been found, and the abode of Alice and Mark remained unknown. The case was not formally closed, but its animate actualization was replaced by acquiescent ecology and assay of admission information. The car was listed in the federal database as stolen, and 2 adults were listed as missing beneath cryptic circumstances. A back Aboriginal 2016, the case of the dematerialization of Elisa and Mark Montero has been archived as an animate but bootless investigation. The assay aggregation affiliated its assignment with a bargain staff, 2 detectives from the Phoenix Police Department, and 1 abettor from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Their capital assignment was to periodically assay any matches in the agent database and bearding bodies found in several states. Every month, the badge accustomed letters of austere or alone cars. Still, none of them matched the VIN cardinal of the gray Honda Accord registered to Mark Montero. In March 2016, a car of a agnate archetypal was begin alone on a clay alley in Cucanino County. However, a assay of the anatomy and agent numbers appear it was not accompanying to the missing couple. In June of that year, the Phoenix Police Department accustomed bearding advice from a man who claimed to accept a parent Monto's car on private property abreast the boondocks of Page. A assay of the armpit and an annual with its owner did not affirm this statement. There was an old auto of an altered make, partially dismantled for parts. Over the abutting few months, several added agnate letters were received. Still, each angry out to be apocryphal or based on misidentification of the car. The Montero ancestors affiliated to pay absorption to the case. Elisa's parents gave interviews to bounded television stations Alert a year, reminding admirers of their daughter's dematerialization and that of her husband. They also maintained a website with an abundant description of the incident, photographs, and appeals for witnesses. Despite this, the breeze of new advice was minimal. By the end of 2016, no reliable assemblage had come forward who had a parent Alice or Mark. Afterwards, they larboard the gas base on May 15, 2015. In Aboriginal 2017, board re-examined video footage from Cartage Camera's 4th US 89, which had been acquired in the Aboriginal weeks afterwards the disappearance. The assay of the Athenaeum did not acknowledge any new details. At one location, approximately 40 kilometers from the aftermost recorded point, a camera captured an agent that appeared to be agnate to Montero's Honda Accord. Still, the affection of the recording did not acquiesce for an absolute identification of the license plate. The date and time on the footage akin the couple's accepted route. There were no surveillance cameras abreast this breadth of the highway, and the car's added avenue could not be determined. In the spring of 2017, the Federal Bureau of Assay Beatifica appealed to adjoining states, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado to assay whether Montero's car could accept been resold or dismantled for genitalia al fresco Arizona and Utah. The responses from these states did not accommodate any matches for the VIN number. Attempts to clue bottomward accessible sales of parts through online assets and auto dismantlers were additionally unsuccessful. At the aforementioned time, board arrested individuals with antecedent aesthetics for advance and car annexation in the breadth of U.S. Avenue 89. Added than 20 bodies who were in Bastille or on acquittal at the time of Montero's disappearance were questioned. No absolute affirmation adjoin any of them was found. In 2018, the Phoenix Badge Administration database recorded the afterlife of 43-year-old Jeffrey Allen Harper, who had ahead been bedeviled of armed robbery and car theft. He died of a drug overdose in a cabin on the outskirts of the city. Harper's name was not linked to the Monto case at the time, as he was not amid those questioned in the Aboriginal years of the investigation. His mention in the database did not agitate the absorption of the assay aggregation until the end of that year. Aback, an amend of the fingerprint and DNA counter database appear about with amplified affirmation from an old car annexation case in 2014. This affirmation was a biological trace larboard in the block of the baseborn car. However, at that time, no absolute articulation to the dematerialization of Elisa and Mark had been established. The case gradually absent priority. In 2019, alone 2 anonymous letters were accustomed and neither independent any absolute facts. The assay team's primary assignment was to amend federal databases annual and assay letters of found vehicles. Despite the abridgment of progress, the case files still adumbrated the allegation for actual action if any new information came to light, abnormally apropos a gray Honda Accord with a specific VIN number. On August 22, 2020, the Cucanino Canton Police Department accustomed a abode from an agriculturalist animate in an alien breadth 40 kilometers west of Flagstaff. The man appear that while dismantling an old metal afford on his property, he apparent a car partially hidden by thick bushes. The car had been anchored for several years, the tires were flat, and the anatomy was covered with a band of dust and rust. The authorization plates were missing. The farmer explained that he had purchased the acreage 3 years ago and had not acclimated the afford or the surrounding breadth because it was on the bend of his acreage and overgrown. Aback the convoying admiral accustomed at the scene, they angled that the agent was a gray sedan, heavily decrepit and with damaged rear lights. A assay of the VIN Cardinal accepted that the car belonged to Mark Montero and had been on the Federal Capital Annual ABAC 2015. The breadth was a non-cordoned off, and an argumentative aggregation was alleged in. During the antecedent inspection, officers noticed that the block lid was bankrupt but not locked. Central were 2 bundles wrapped in blankets anchored with ropes and artificial ties. The Coconino County Forensic Aggregation accustomed at the acreage on the aforementioned day, August 22, 2020, at approximately 4:30 p.m. The armpit was cordoned off with chicken badge band and temporary barriers were erected to anticipate crooked access. The car parked beneath a metal awning was on a compacted clay area. On the south side, the armpit was belted off with a metal sheet, partially angled and rusted, which apparently hid the car from view. The condition of the anatomy adumbrated that it had been apparent to the elements for a affiliated time. Corrosion on the lower part of the doors, cracks on the windshield, a band of dust and bulb debris. Afore aperture the trunk, the experts took photos of all the alien parts. They took prints and traces from the aperture handles, block lid, and hood. There were aside traces of blanch on the rear bumper, apparently from acquaintance with a corrective object. There were no license plates, and the mountings for them were alone with decayed bolt remnants. There were no keys in the locks, and the car doors were apprenticed except for the trunk, which was captivated shut alone by a latch. The block was opened in the attendance of a Phoenix Badge Administration detective, a adumbrative of the commune attorney, and 2 argumentative experts. Afterwards appropriation the lid, 2 ample bundles were found, each captivated in an old aphodic dejected bleed blanket. The blankets were anchored with nylon ropes and additionally angry with white industrial-grade artificial clamps. There were amber stains on top of the blankets, apparently traces of biological fluids. The aroma adumbrated a high amount of decomposition. Still, due to the ashen accompaniment of the bodies and the time they had been there, it was not pungent. Both bundles were removed to simulate a tarpaulin laid out abutting to the car and opened with gloves while being photographed and filmed. Central anniversary array were animal charcoal in an accompaniment of complete skeletonization. The aboriginal array independent the skeleton of a changeable and the added independent the skeleton of a male. The position of the basic adumbrated that the bodies had been placed in an angled position with the knees pulled up to the chest. The wrist basic of both victims had bits of artificial clamps identical to those acclimated to tie the blankets. There were no signs of gunshot wounds on the skulls, but argumentative experts noted traces of cut wounds on the man's ribs. Some accoutrement was preserved. Fragments of denim and a zip-up sports anorak were begin on the changeable remains, and bits of affection trousers and a dark coat were begin on the macho remains. A metal key to a padlock, afterwards a key arena or arrangement, was begin in one of the pockets of the macho jacket. Afterwards the bodies were removed, the block was thoroughly examined. The upholstery had multiple amber stains, some of which were anon taken by argumentative experts for DNA analysis. Traces of sweat acceptable for fingerprinting were begin on the abutting apparent of the block lid and on the appropriate wall. In the right corner of the block compartment, there was an artificial bag with an Alone 1L soda canteen and a disposable cup. The bag was partially covered with leaves and baby bits acceptable accumulated during the car's affiliated accumulator under a canopy. The car was loaded to assimilate a tow barter and beatific to the Canton Forensic Center. The charcoal were taken to the morgue for argumentative examination. The basic able cessation accustomed to canicule afterwards accepted that the skeletons accord to undeveloped male and undeveloped female. Dental assay application dental records provided by ancestors accustomed the identities of the asleep to be accepted on the 3rd day afterwards the discovery. They were Alice Montero and Mark Montero, who had abolished on May 15, 2015. Afterwards, the identities were confirmed. A separate date of the assay began, establishing the affairs beneath which the car concluded up on the farmer's property. The backer was questioned. He appeared that he had purchased the artifice in 2017 and that the shed beneath which the car was begin was already in poor condition. According to him, he had never looked beneath it because the surrounding frondescence was abutting and the afford itself was not used for autumn accessories or materials. The antecedent buyer of the plot, who lived in Addition State, died in 2016. The affidavit on the alteration of the plot did not accommodate any advice about who acclimated it amid Montero's disappearance and its auction to the farmer. The key point was the assay of biological traces taken from the block lining. An anniversary afterwards the discovery, the Abomination Lab appear that the DNA contour begin on the central of the block lit akin that of Jeffrey Allen Harper, a man who died of imbalance in 2018. His DNA was already in the database due to antecedent aesthetics for armed robbery and carjacking. This bout was the aboriginal absolute affirmation bond a specific alone to the case. Further steps in the assay focused on reconstructing the avenue taken by Monto's car afterwards it abolished and determining how it came into Harper's possession. The badge began interviewing abeyant witnesses, examining Harper's banking action in May 2015 and blockage his movements during that Aon application corpuscle buzz records. Afterwards accepting a DNA match with the contour of Jeffrey Allen Harper. The assay aggregation afflicted the antecedents of the case. On September 4, 2020, Phoenix detectives and FBI agents accomplished an in-depth assay of Harper's movements in May 2015. To do this, they requested archived mobile phone abstracts stored as allotment of added investigations as able-bodied as annal from assessment roads, surveillance cameras, and bank agenda transactions. Although added than 5 years had passed, some of this abstracts was still stored in departmental archives and third affair organizations. According to a report compiled by the Abstracts Assay Department, Harper's corpuscle buzz was animate in northeastern Arizona on the day of Alice and Mark Montero's disappearance. The arrangement of corpuscle belfry signals indicated that on the morning of May 15th, he was in the Winslow area. Then at about 10:40 a.m., his accessory was registered in the advantage breadth of a base confined to breadth of U.S. Avenue 89. About 20 kilometers from the Chevron gas base breadth Monto was aftermost seen. At about 11:43 a.m., Harper's buzz arresting disappeared, which coincided with the time aback Elisa and Mark's phones chock-full transmitting. An analysis of coffer affairs showed that Harper acclimated banknote that day and his bank cards were not used. However, 2 canicule afterwards Monto's disappearance, he purchased ammunition at a gas base in the Flagstaff area, advantageous with his card. Surveillance cameras at the gas base captured footage of Harper animate a gray auto that looked like Montero's car. Due to the angel affection and bend of the camera, it was not accessible to identify the authorization plate. Still, the make and archetypal akin a Honda Accord from the 2000s. Alongside to the assay of Harper's movements, his ambience were also investigated. It was a custom that in 2015, he lived in a busy abode on the outskirts of Phoenix and did not accept an abiding job. Before his arrest in 2012, he had been circuitous in petty annexation and car theft, served time for armed robbery, and was appear on acquittal at the end of 2013. Investigators begin no affiliation amid Harper, Elisa, and Mark Montero before their disappearance. In May 2015, Harper was not beneath badge administration and was chargeless to move about. It was absurd to catechism Harper due to his death in 2018. Board focused on interviewing his acquaintances, including bodies he had been in acquaintance with amid May and June 2015. One of his above Bastille mates, who lived in Flagstaff, appeared that in May of that year, Harper was animate a car he was ambuscade from anybody and didn't want a actualization breath he got it. According to the witness, Harper explained that the car was not registered and that it was bigger not to ask questions. The attestant did not accommodate any other direct affirmation advertence the time of the abduction. The argumentative examination of Elisa and Mark's charcoal affiliated in parallel. Experts angled that death occurred in May or June 2015. Elisa had fractures on her ribs and forearms consistent with arresting movements. Mark had several cut wounds to his ribs and except bones, apparently from a knife or added aciculate object. No signs of gunshot wounds were found. Artificial ties on the wrists of both victims adumbrated that they had been apprenticed before their deaths. The exact apparatus of the murder could not be angled due to the action of the remains. Forensic experts additionally analyzed the capacity of the block and the bag with the canteen begin inside. Fractional fingerprints belonging to Harper were begin on the canteen and mug. No DNA traces of anyone other than the victims and Harper were found. This abled the investigators' approach that he acted alone. An assay of the blankets showed that they were bogus in the Aboriginal 2000s and awash in a retail chain that Harper had visited ahead according to his coffer affairs from antecedent years. Based on the data collected, board complete a basic timeline. On May 15, 2015, Alice and Mark stopped at a Chevron gas base at about 11:20 a.m. Harper, who was in the area, may accept noticed them and followed them. Afterwards abrogation the gas station. The couple may accept been chock-full or affected to cull over beneath the affectation of a malfunction or added reason. Next, Harper apparently acclimated force, angry them up with artificial zip ties, and placed them in the block of the car. He drove the car to an alien breadth the annihilation took place, again larboard the bodies in the block and affiliated to use the vehicle for some time. About several weeks later, he hid the car beneath a awning on the bound's breadth it was afterwards found. The assay began analytic all alter endemic or acclimated by Harper amid May and July 2015, including alone buildings, rented garages, and acreage plots acceptance to acquaintances. The ambition was to acquisition added affirmation pointing to the location of the annihilation or the motive for the advance on Montero. In mid-September 2020, the assay aggregation acquired admission to acreage and rental annal in the name of Jeffrey Allen Harper and his close acquaintances. During the analysis, it was accustomed that in May 2015, Harper busy a lone metal garage in an automated breadth on the outskirts of Phoenix. The charter was for 3 months from May to July of that year, afterwards which the bounds were relet to another tenant. The buyer of the barn circuitous appear that Harper paid in cash, alternate the keys at anniversary late, and that aback he handed over the garage, there was a able aroma of gasoline and dampness. No complaints or letters of offenses were accustomed during that period. On September 21, 2020, investigators, accepting acquired a warrant, searched the garage, which was currently actuality acclimated by addition person. Before the chase began, the bounds were austere of the accepted tenant's belongings, and the attic and walls were examined application argumentative lighting accessories and reagents to ascertain traces of blood. Several aphotic spots, invisible to the naked eye, were begin on the accurate attic abreast the back wall. A quick assay on the atom showed a positive reaction to blood. The samples were beatific to the lab for DNA testing. A fragment of artificial band agnate to that begin on Elisa and Mark's wrists was additionally begin in the gap amid the coffer and the floor. In the bend of the garage, beneath a band of dust lay a allotment of constructed bolt barometer approximately 30 x 40 centimeters with traces of amber stains. In a metal cabinet, which according to the accepted tenant, had been larboard abaft by the antecedent occupant, there was an old rubberized cape and a brace of work gloves with capricious degrees of wear. The gloves were placed in abstracted accoutrements for argumentative analysis. 4 days later, the class accepted that the DNA from the stains on the accurate attic and on the bolt belonged to Mark Montero. A alloyed DNA contour was begin on the raincoat, which contained traces of Elisa Montero and Harper. Harper's biological actual was also found on the central of one of the gloves. On the outside, some microparticles akin the composition of the upholstery in Montero's car trunk. These allegation accustomed board to achieve that the couple was in this barn aback they were fatally afflicted or anon after. Further assay of CCTV footage from cameras installed at the entrances to the automated breadth in 2015 revealed that on the black of May 15th, at about 7:47 p.m. a gray sedan, matching the description of Montero's Honda Accord, entered the zone. The affection of the recording did not allow the faces in the car to be distinguished. Still, the contour of the disciplinarian and the absence of passengers in the advanced bench were visible. The cameras alone recorded the entry. The avenue of a car with this authorization plate number or beheld characteristics was not recorded. This meant that the car could have larboard the breadth through an unregistered avenue or in dismantled form. Still, accustomed that it was begin complete on the farm, it was best acceptable taken abroad at a afterwards time. Board checked neighboring garages, but begin no accessible clues accompanying to the case. However, One of the tenants recalled seeing Harper backward one black in May 2015 auction ample bundles captivated in bolt from the block of his car and carrying them into the garage. The attestant did not anticipate abundant of it at the time. Bold they were accoutrements of belongings. 5 years later, this affidavit became all-important amplified affirmation for the investigation. Afterwards establishing the barn as an accessible annihilation site, the badge focused on the avenue the car took from the Phoenix automated breadth to the acreage in Cucumino County. FBI logisticians calculated the best acceptable routes, demography into annual the abstention of cameras on assessment anchorage and major highways. It was accustomed that in June and July 2015, Harper was bent on camera several times in an old auto barter traveling in the administration of the farm. Assemblage amid his acquaintances confirmed that during that aeon he was attractive for a abode to adumbrate article and allurement about alone sheds or warehouses. By the end of October 2020, the analytic aggregation had able a full abode annual all the affirmation gathered, DNA matches, concrete evidence from the garage, attestant statements, and a timeline of Harper's movements. The documents were handed over to the commune attorney. Aback Harper had died 2 years earlier. The bent case against him was bankrupt posthumously, and the assay was acutely bankrupt with him actuality, accustomed as the sole perpetrator of the kidnapping and annihilation of Alice and Mark Montero. However, the catechism of accessible motives remained open. There was no adumbration in the case book that he knew them beforehand, and the alone animate approach was that it was a robbery attack. Montero's claimed accoutrements did. Action of the remains. Forensic experts additionally analyzed the capacity of the block and the bag with the canteen begin inside. Fractional fingerprints belonging to Harper were begin on the canteen and mug. No DNA traces of anyone other than the victims and Harper were found. This abled the investigators' approach that he acted alone. An assay of the blankets showed that they were bogus in the aboriginal 2000s and awash in a retail chain that Harper had visited ahead according to his coffer affairs from antecedent years. Based on the data collected, board complete a basic timeline. On May 15, 2015, Alice and Mark stopped at a Chevron gas base at about 11:20 a.m. Harper, who was in the area, may accept noticed them and followed them. Afterwards abrogation the gas station, the couple may accept been chock-full or affected to cull over beneath the affectation of a malfunction or added reason. Next, Harper apparently acclimated force, angry them up with artificial zip ties, and placed them in the block of the car. He drove the car to an alien breadth the annihilation took place, again larboard the bodies in the block and affiliated to use the vehicle for some time. About several weeks later, he hid the car beneath a awning on the bound's breadth it was afterwards found. The assay began analytic all alter endemic or acclimated by Harper amid May and July 2015, including alone buildings, rented garages, and acreage plots acceptance to acquaintances. The ambition was to acquisition added affirmation pointing to the location of the annihilation or the motive for the advance on Montero. In mid-September 2020, the assay aggregation acquired admission to acreage and rental annal in the name of Jeffrey Allen Harper and his close acquaintances. During the analysis, it was accustomed that in May 2015, Harper busy a lone metal garage in an automated breadth on the outskirts of Phoenix. The charter was for 3 months from May to July of that year. Afterwards, which the bounds were relet to another tenant. The buyer of the barn circuitous appear that Harper paid in cash, alternate the keys at anniversary late, and that aback he handed over the garage, there was a able aroma of gasoline and dampness. No complaints or letters of offenses were accustomed during that period. On September 21, 2020, investigators, accepting acquired a warrant, searched the garage, which was currently actuality acclimated by addition person. Before the chase began, the bounds were austere of the accepted tenant's belongings, and the attic and walls were examined application argumentative lighting accessories and reagents to ascertain traces of blood. Several aphotic spots, invisible to the naked eye, were begin on the accurate attic abreast the aback wall. A quick assay on the atom showed a positive reaction to blood. The samples were beatific to the lab for DNA testing. A fragment of artificial band agnate to that begin on Elisa and Mark's wrists was additionally begin in the gap amid the coffer and the floor. In the bend of the garage, beneath a band of dust lay a allotment of constructed bolt barometer approximately 30 x 40 centimeters with traces of amber stains. In a metal cabinet, which according to the accepted tenant, had been larboard abaft by the antecedent occupant, there was an old rubberized cape and a brace of work gloves with capricious degrees of wear. The gloves were placed in abstracted accoutrements for argumentative analysis. 4 days later, the class accepted that the DNA from the stains on the accurate attic and on the bolt belonged to Mark Montero. A alloyed DNA contour was on the raincoat, which contained traces of Elisa Montero and Harper. Harper's biological actual was also found on the central of one of the gloves. On the outside, some microparticles akin the composition of the upholstery in Montero's car trunk. These allegations accustomed Board to achieve that the couple was in this barn aback they were fatally afflicted, or anon after. Further assay of CCTV footage from cameras installed at the entrances to the automated breath in 2015 revealed that on the black of May 15th, at about 7:47 p.m., a gray sedan, matching the description of Montero's Honda Accord, entered the zone. The affection of the recording did not allow the faces in the car to be distinguished. Still, the contour of the disciplinarian and the absence of passengers in the advanced bench were visible. The cameras alone recorded the entry. The avenue of a car with this authorization plate number or beheld characteristics was not recorded. This meant that the car could have larboard the breadth through an unregistered avenue or in dismantled form. Still, accustomed that it was complete on the farm, it was best acceptable taken abroad at a afterwards time. Board checked neighboring garages, but no accessible clues accompanying to the case. However, one of the tenants recalled seeing Harper backward one black in May 2015 auction ample bundles captivated in bolt from the block of his car and carrying them into the garage. The attestant did not anticipate abundant of it at the time. Bold they were accoutrements of belongings. 5 years later, this affidavit became all-important amplified affirmation for the investigation. Afterwards establishing the barn as an accessible annihilation site, the badge focused on the avenue the car took from the Phoenix automated breadth to the acreage in Cucumino County. FBI logisticians calculated the best acceptable routes, demography into annual the abstention of cameras on assessment anchorage and major highways. It was accustomed that in June and July 2015, Harper was bent on camera several times in an old auto barter traveling in the administration of the farm. Assemblage amid his acquaintances confirmed that during that aeon he was attractive for a abode to adumbrate article and allurement about alone sheds or warehouses. By the end of October 2020, the analytic aggregation had able a full abode annual all the affirmation gathered, DNA matches, concrete evidence from the garage, attestant statements, and a timeline of Harper's movements. The documents were handed over to the commune attorney. Aback Harper had died 2 years earlier. The bent case against him was bankrupt posthumously, and the assay was acutely bankrupt with him actuality, accustomed as the sole perpetrator of the kidnapping and annihilation of Alice and Mark Montero. However, the catechism of accessible motives remained open. There was no adumbration in the case book that he knew them beforehand, and the alone animate approach was that it was a robbery attack. Montero's claimed accoutrements did. Allegation any help? Kelton noticed that the rear auto of the car were hardly sunk into bendable arena, as if the car had skidded off the city and got stuck. He saw a woman's backpack and a plastic bottle of baptize on the commuter seat. Still, there were no cartage arresting central the car. According to Kelton's recollection, the bearings seemed aberrant to him. Still, he collection abroad because the man acutely did not appetite to talk. An important point was that Kelton claimed that the car had a cavity on the appropriate rear aperture about at the level of the handle. Board knew that Mark Montero's Honda Accord did absolutely accept a agnate dent, which he had sustained 6 months afore his dematerialization in an accessory accident. This actuality acute absorption in Kelton's testimony, alike admitting about 6 years had anesthetized aback the events. FBI agents went to the breadth of US 60 artery adumbrated by Kelton to appraise the area. The alley ran through a sparsely busy breadth with boscage, and a few acreage barrio forth the route. The dirt road mentioned by Kelton led to old barn hangars that had affiliated been alone and were partially destroyed. Archival accessory images showed that in May 2015, these barrio were still intact, and a clay alley led to one of them which had a back been covered with gravel. The badge speculated that Harper ability except acclimated this abode as a acting breadth he kept his victims afore alteration them to Phoenix. In March 2021, an absolute chase of the barn breadth and surrounding breadth was conducted. Argumentative board acclimated metal detectors, arena-biting radar, and search dogs accomplished to ascertain animal charcoal and claret traces. Central one of the destroyed hangars, they begin several old artificial clamps identical in measurement and blush to those begin on Montero's bodies. Abutting to it lay a allotment of braiding partially anchored in the ground. An assay accustomed that the actual of the clamps and braiding was produced at the aforementioned branch and during the aforementioned aeon, as those acclimated in the annihilation case. On the attic of the hangar, under a band of dust and debris, argumentative experts begin aside stains that, a back advised with a luminol reagent, gave off an appropriate glow, advertence the attendance of claret residue. Samples were taken and beatific for analysis. 2 weeks later, the class accepted that the DNA from these samples akin Elisa Montero's profile. This after effect was abundant affirmation that the victims had been in the aerodrome possibly anon after their abduction. The reconstructed timeline demography into annual the new abstracts was as follows. Afterwards abrogation the Chevron gas station, Alice and Mark were intercepted by Harper on a breadth of the artery breadth cartage was dispersed and forced to stop. He again confused them to a hangar abreast the US 60 Avenue breadth. He kept them angry up. From there, he transported them to a busy barn in Phoenix where the murders took place. He afterwards hid the car with the bodies on an acreage in Cucamonga County. New evidence, despite the case already actuality closed, was aggregate into an abstracted added report. The victims' ancestors were informed of the allegation, and that the breadth of the antecedent apprehension had now been accustomed with an aerial degree of certainty. Afterwards the assay of the hangar and acceptance that Alice Monter was inside, the investigation team confused onto blockage the approach of accessible abettor to Jeffrey Allen Harper. Although the affirmation appropriate that he may accept acted alone, the actuality that 2 adults were detained, transported over affiliated distances, and the car with the bodies was afterwards hidden aloft doubts that Harper could have done all this afterwards alfresco help. At the end of March 2021, all of Harper's buzz admission for the aeon from May 10th to May 20th, 2015 were traced. At the moment aback Elisa and Mark's buzz chockfull responding, Harper's accessory was angry off. Still, 2 canicule earlier, he had exchanged several calls and argument letters with a man called Rick Madden, 41, who lived in the Tempe area. Madden had 2 above-mentioned aesthetics for annexation and control of stolen property, was confined to abeyance sentence, and was on acquittal at the time of the events. Investigators determined that Madden had admission to a white Ford Econoline van registered to his brother in May 2015. Surveillance camera footage from abreast of Phoenix automated breadth captured a agnate van in the black hours of May 15th. The time of actualization coincided with the moment aback a Honda Accord believed to accord to Montero entered the barn complex. The affection of the recording did not acquiesce the authorization bull cardinal to be read. Still, the accepted actualization and action of the vehicle akin Madden's van. In Aboriginal April 2021, Madden was questioned. He denied any captivation in the kidnapping or annihilation of Montero. He claimed that he was out of boondocks in mid-May accomplishing adjustment work. A assay of his account showed that amid May 15th and 17, his buzz was absolutely amid in Phoenix, not breadth he claimed to be. No concrete affirmation bound him anon to the abomination was found, but amplified affirmation prompted investigators to abide their investigation. At the aforementioned time, a added assay of the capacity of the hangar was agitated out. On one of the artificial clamps begin abreast the abode breadth Alice's claret was found. Forensic experts apparent a fractional fingerprint that did not accord to Harper or the victims. This fragment of the fingerprint partially akin a book on Rick Madden's book in the badge database. The bout was incomplete. The print was bedraggled and damaged, so it couldn't be acclimated as absolute affirmation in court, but it did accession suspicions. In May 2021, the assay aggregation requested a chase accreditation for Madden's garage. Inside, they begin several empty gasoline cans, pieces of artificial sheeting, and old car upholstery cut from the block of an alien car. An examination showed that the bolt of the upholstery did not bout that of Montero's Honda Accord. Still, the manufacturing technology and anatomy of the actual were identical to the upholstery bedeviled from Harper's garage. No traces of claret were begin on these items. As an after effect of an absolute investigation, the investigators concluded that there was no absolute affirmation to allegation Madden. Still, his possible captivation in Harper's movements could not be disqualified out. In the final centralized FBI report, this episode was recorded as an bottomless, accessible accomplice. No academic case was brought adjoin. Him as Harper's afterlife and the disability to accumulate new absolute affirmation fabricated bent case unfeasible. By the end of June 2021, the better approach had been shelved indefinitely. All the advice gathered, including fractional fingerprints, buzz records, and video footage, was kept on book with a note advertence that it could be re-examined if new assay technologies or a testant affidavit became available. Meanwhile, Elisa and Mark's ancestors contacted the Phoenix Badge Department, requesting an accessible appointment and acknowledgement of the capacity of the agenda of events, including the recently begun hangar. They hoped this would allure the absorption of added abeyant assemblage who may accept Sean Harper or his assembly in May 2015. Administration Admiral agreed and preparations for the appointment began in July. On August 9, 2021, appointment on the annihilation of Alice and Mark Montero was captivated in the appointment allowance of the Phoenix Badge Department. The allowance was filled with bounded and bounded media representatives, several federal reporters, and the victims' relatives, Alice's parents and Mark's adolescent brother. On the table in advance of the speakers were photos from the breadth the car was found, images from the Chevron gas station, accessory images of the hangar abreast U.S. Avenue 60, and a schematic map with a red band appearance Harper's accepted route. The columnist administrator began with an abrupt chronology. The dematerialization on May 15, 2015. The discovery of the car on an acreage in August 2020. Acceptance of Harper's involvement. The assay of the hangar in February 2021 and circumstantial evidence pointing to an accessible accomplice. A head abstruse capacity were revealed, the assay of Alice's claret in the hangar, a fractional fingerprint that did not accord to Harper, and Buzz Annell assuming his interactions with Rick Madden. At the end of the briefing, the badge appealed to the public, allurement anyone who had seen Harper, Madden, their vehicles, or Montero's car in May-June 2015 to contact the department. They emphasized that alike the best Bush memories, which at first glance may accept irrelevant, are essential. A abstracted Buzz Cardinal was set up to accept information, and an anonymous online anatomy was created. Aloof 3 Canicule afterwards the briefing, the police accustomed to alarm from a woman called Lynn Hargrave, 51, who lived in Page, Arizona. She said that at the end of May 2015, she was animate at a baby roadside cabin amid abreast U.S. Avenue 89. According to her, one evening, a mannequin Harper accustomed at the cabin in a gray sedan. He asked for an allowance for one night, paid in cash, and banned to actualization his driver's license, adage that he had larboarded in the car. Hargrave remembered that the back of the car was partially covered with an aphotic tarp anchored with braiding, and the interior appeared empty. Aback asked about his luggage. He replied that he would leave aggregate in the car. According to Hargrave's recollection, that aforementioned night she saw the man go out to his car, open the trunk, and assay Article Central with a flashlight. She did not go close, but noticed that the block lid remained accessible best than usual. Aboriginal the abutting morning, the man larboard afterwards waiting for the accepted checkout time. Anon thereafter, she began pieces of a aphotic dejected absolute and several artificial ties, one of which had been cut in a debris can on the cabin grounds. This information was important for two reasons. First, the breadth of the cabin coincided with one of the average routes Harper could accept taken to abstain above cities. Second, the description of the absolute akin, absolutely the ones acclimated to absolute Elisa and Mark's bodies. The investigators ordered a chase of the breadth about the motel. Alike admitting it had been over 6 years aback the crime, only baby pieces of bolt were begin about the alembic armpit and in the surrounding bushes, which according to experts could not be anxiously articular due to the abolition of the fibers. Nevertheless, Hargrave's affidavit helped analyze the agenda of Harper's movements. The investigation could now accept that at the end of May afterwards the murders, he had Catholic North, possibly to acquisition a abode to hide the car and the bodies. This avenue included stops in sparsely populated areas, such as the acreage breadth the auto was afterwards found. This new information was added to the case file, and Hargrave was acutely accustomed as a attestant in the case. Her affidavit confirmed that Harper had been traveling with the victims' bodies for several canicule afterwards the abduction, which in about face meant a more affiliated aeon of apprehension than a head thought. By mid-September 2021, the analytic aggregation had completed the allocation of all the abstracts during the 6-year investigation. The final abode was an abundant agenda that accumulated the abstracts from the antecedent investigation, the after-effects of the assignment afterwards the car was found, and all the added advice obtained after the case was formally closed. On May 15, 2015, Alice and Mark Montero left Phoenix and headed for Bryce Canyon Civic Park. At 11:20 a.m., they were recorded by cameras at a Chevron gas base abreast the boondocks of Holos, Arizona. During the aforementioned period, Jeffrey Allen Harper was in the aforementioned breadth as accepted by Corpuscle Buzz Records. Approximately 20 account afterwards abrogation the gas station, Alice and Mark's phones chock-full working. Added investigation revealed that anon thereafter, the brace was forcibly chock-full by Harper and taken to an alone hangar off the US 60 highway. There they were captivated apprenticed as accepted by the discovery of Elisa's claret and artificial zip ties identical to those begin on the victim's wrists. That evening, Monto's Honda Accord was bent on camera entering an automated breadth in Phoenix. Breadth Harper had busy a metal garage. Traces of Mark's blood, bolt bits with Elisa's and Harper's DNA, and plastic zip ties were begin in the garage. The assay accustomed that it was actuality with an aerial amount of probability that the baleful injuries were inflicted. Mark had cut wounds to his bones and Alice had fractures appropriate of arresting movements. No signs of gunshot wounds were found. After the murder, Harper affiliated to use Montero's car for some time. Attestant statements and video footage indicate that at the end of May, he spent the night at a cabin on US 89 near the boondocks of Page. There, pieces of a aphotic dejected absolute and artificial ties similar to those acclimated in the abomination were begin in the trash. In the weeks that followed, Harper fabricated several trips to the Arctic allotment of the state, alienated assessment anchorage, and ample citizenry centers. In June or July, he confused the car to an acreage in Coxinino Canton breadth. He hid it under a metal shed, partially abashing it from actualization with bushes and metal sheets. The car remained there until August 2020 aback a agriculturalist abolition the afford accidentally apparent it. When the block was opened, the ashen charcoal of Elisa and Mark were begin inside, captivated in aphotic dejected blankets and apprenticed with artificial ties. Traces of Harper's DNA were begin in the block and on its lid. Assay of all the affirmation accustomed him as the sole perpetrator of the kidnapping and murder. By the time his captivation was established, he was dead. He died of a biologic balance in a cabin on the outskirts of Phoenix in 2018. The assay additionally looked into the achievability of an accomplice. Phone contacts and an abridged fingerprint in the hangar acicular to Rick Madden. Still, no absolute affirmation of his involvement was found. No case was opened to join him, but the abstracts advertence him remained in the archives with a note, accessible participant. An affiliated assay affiliated Harper to several added baffling disappearances and assaults, but due to the abridgment of absolute affirmation and the breadth of time that had passed, these episodes remained accurately unproven. The cessation of the investigation declared that the kidnapping of Alice and Mark Montero was motivated by greed. The victims were abducted on an accessible amplitude of road, taken to an alone architecture, and again transported to a busy barn breadth. They were killed. The perpetrator again confused the bodies about for several canicule afore ambuscade the car. All of Harper's actions were agitated out to appropriate acreage and apparently banknote, while anxiously avoiding direct acquaintance with law administration agencies. The final report, added than 400 pages long, was handed over to the Cucanino Canton Commune Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A abstracted bankrupt affair was organized for the victims' relatives, at which they were presented with all the established facts. Elisa's parents and Mark's brother absently to broadcast the main allegation about to draw absorption to added accessible cases involving Harper. The Montero case became one of the region's best notable examples of how, alike years afterwards and afterwards the suspect's death, it is accessible to reconstruct the complete account of abomination by accumulation argumentative methods, artery abstracts exchange, and witness testimony. However, the actuality that the car with the bodies had been missing for added than 5 years and had remained on private acreage all that time acquired in clamor and sparked a agitation about the need to ameliorate procedures for analytic for missing vehicles. The timeline was complete. The affirmation was recorded and the case was closed. Alone-changing questions remained about Harper's motives, the accessible captivation of added individuals, and how abounding agnate crimes he could have committed while actual undetected.